Chapter 5. I'm grateful for the private elevator, Giselle said as they rode up to the Silver Crescent's penthouse. And the wood paneling is gorgeous. You can thank Harrison Cartwright. I don't know if he had a private elevator when the building first went up, but he installed all new elevators throughout the building before he finally turned it over to my dad. If he went to that kind of expense, he must have thought he'd get to keep it after all. Are all the elevators this nice? Not quite. This one has genuine hardwood. The others are laminate. I know you don't think much of Harrison Cartwright, but he had good taste. Can't argue with that. Wait till you see the view from the penthouse. The thought came to Luke that he'd never brought a woman up here. Well, that would be because he hadn't become involved with anyone since his dad died. Too damn busy. But he certainly intended to bring women up here at some point in time when his life settled down and his sister stopped giving him fits. With his mother's blessing, he'd renovated the master bedroom and bath so it no longer resembled his parents' bedroom. He was happy with the way it looked, although he wouldn't be showing it off to Giselle. But how ironic that the first woman he invited here was one he had no intention of sleeping with. The only people who had seen the final result had been Cynthia and Owen. His sister had liked it okay but thought it needed more color. She'd compared the suite to a hospital room, which wasn't the effect he was going for. Then Owen had seen it the day he'd supervised an update of the penthouse security system. Owen, a guy of few words, had said it was nice. That didn't tell Luke a damn thing. Owen wasn't exactly Martha Stewart, but Luke would have liked a little more commentary. When it came to color, he was no expert, so he'd stuck with white. Even that had been trickier than he'd thought. Who knew there were so many shades of it? But he'd found one he liked called linen, and then he'd matched everything to that. The suite resembled his image of heaven, with the pillows and quilts reminding him of fluffy clouds. He'd found some pictures of Greek temples also white, and put those on the walls which were also white. It all blended in beautifully, but it might be too monochromatic. He just wasn't sure. They stepped off the elevator and he used a card key to open the black enamel, silver-etched double doors into the foyer. Then he moved back and let Giselle go in ahead of him. He did like the way she moved. He wondered if she'd taken dancing lessons as a kid and maybe dreamed of making it a career. That would explain her defense of Cynthia. Maybe he'd ask her sometime. They walked through the elegant foyer with its chrome tables and quarter moon mirrors on either side. Fresh flower arrangements provided by his staff perfumed the air. He left the envelope containing Cynthia's picture in the foyer. He'd deal with it later. Right now he was interested in Giselle's reaction to the penthouse. This was his home now, and he realized that he wanted her to like it. Why he even cared about her opinion was a question for another time. He'd kept the living room decorated exactly as it had been when his parents had lived there. Muted lighting revealed soft leather sectionals in butter yellow. Pillows in every color of the rainbow were scattered around. Maybe that's what Cynthia had meant. He needed some of those little square pillows. In his bedroom, the open floor plan included a linen-draped dining table on the left side of the room. Not long ago he'd taken out the two leaves to create a cozier setup. He didn't intend to hold the kind of large-scale dinner parties his parents had enjoyed. The kitchen was through an arched opening to the right, and the bedrooms were also to the right down a long hallway. Most first-time visitors missed those details. Usually they were captured by the floor-to-ceiling windows that provided an unobstructed view of the strip. His father had said the panoramic vista was worth all the effort of winning that lawsuit. Luke didn't agree, considering it had shortened his dad's life, but the view was spectacular, especially now that the sun had set. The windows lined the west and north walls. Unless he was there to deal with the shades, a maid came in and raised them on the west windows just before sunset so that even as you walked into the room you could watch the sun go down. He and Giselle had missed that show, but it didn't matter. Looking north was a non-stop extravaganza. In the foreground jutted the skyscrapers of Manhattan, with the Statue of Liberty and the Coney Island Cyclone roller coaster looping through the buildings. Beyond that, the distinctive Eiffel Tower spire glittered against the night sky. Across the way, streams of water jetted upward from the dancing fountain fronting the Bellagio. Giselle walked toward the window. That's quite a view, Dalton. He came up to stand beside her. My father never got tired of looking at it. Here, let me take your coat. He helped her out of it before removing his still slightly damp denim jacket. He laid them both over the back of the sectional. I'd forgotten how over-the-top Vegas is. That's what fantasy is all about, going over the top. He studied her profile. She had a high forehead and an aristocratic nose, both of which made her look intelligent and a little snooty. Her mouth, though, was extremely lush. He could imagine that mouth sucking on a chocolate-covered strawberry. He stared at the lights of the strip and reminded himself to focus on the mission, getting Bryce Landry out of town, and Cynthia straightened out. It's mesmerizing, isn't it? Giselle said. It can be. My dad used to love standing here and reveling in the fact that Harrison Cartwright was now denied this view. But Harrison built illusions, which provides a mirror image from the north end of the strip. Something clicked when she said that. He looked over at her. You've been on the top floor of illusions, then? Her startled glance told him she hadn't meant to say that. Yeah. Briefly. It's a very exclusive casino and hotel, booked up months ahead, I hear. Getting into illusions is tougher than getting into Fort Knox. I've heard that. She returned her attention to the view. I didn't think to ask where you were staying while you're here. I'm guessing you're at Illusions. She kept her gaze on the sparkling lights and the constant flow of traffic 40 floors below them, but her cheeks had become rosy. The Cartwrights are family friends. He'd bet she hadn't intended for him to know that. Earlier he'd asked how she'd learned about his problems with Cynthia. Now he knew. You and Vaughn Cartwright had a little conversation before you came over to the moon to see me, didn't you? She turned to him, putting her back to the view. She looked beautiful standing there, surrounded by the lights, and he wondered if he was dealing with a modern version of Mata Hari. So she wasn't a very good spy. They'd been together a couple of hours and she'd already revealed her connection to the enemy. Don't leap to the wrong conclusions, Luke. Like what? His phone pinged. Could be from Cynthia. Taking his phone from his pocket, he clicked on the message. He stared at the screen for a moment. Busted. What do you mean? He turned the phone so she could see the picture embedded in the message. They must have hidden a motion-activated camera in that room. Giselle gazed at the image and sighed. And now my brother knows I'm here and that I came unannounced. I'd better text him. Taking out her phone, she typed a brief message. Maybe this is just as well. I told him I really wanted to talk with him and I hoped we could get together soon. If he's up for that, it might open the door for you and Cynthia to have a heart-to-heart too. I'd like that. Except he didn't know what he planned to say yet. The more time he spent with Giselle, the more his perception seemed to shift. He was no longer exactly sure where he stood on the subject of Cynthia's future. Before he talked to her, he ought to figure that out. Giselle tucked her phone away. So where were we? He had to think about that. Surrounded by the gem-like colors of the casino lights, she was a vision. He'd been trying to ignore his attraction from the moment she'd walked into his office. Then he remembered they'd been talking about her connection to Vaughn Cartwright. Okay, that would help cool his libido. He cleared his throat. You were telling me about your friendship with the Cartwright family. I'm here to bring my brother home. That's my only agenda. I believe you. Partly because he wanted to. He plain liked her. She was smart, confident, and didn't pull her punches. Plus she'd come all the way to Vegas in an effort to talk some sense into her brother, and he certainly related to that. Whatever feud the Daltons and the Cartwrights have going on has nothing to do with me. She met his gaze. I connected with Vaughn only because our families are acquainted, and so I emailed him to see if he had any idea what was going on with my brother. Is Vaughn a friend of his? I don't think they've ever met. But I can tell you that Vaughn's not happy. That my brother's hanging out with your sister. As I said, my family knows his family, and Bryce joining forces with a Dalton is seen as consorting with the enemy. So why are you here with me? Isn't that the same thing? No. Vaughn understands that I need to do whatever it takes to get my brother back home. If Bryce had hooked up with any woman other than Cynthia, Vaughn would be helping me track them down. But he can't come to the rescue when a Dalton's involved. Luke sighed. I'll accept that. And speaking of Cynthia, I need to check the photo gallery and see if she's swiped any other pictures. Do you mind if I tag along? He'd assumed that she would go. Why wouldn't you? Because these are your family photos. It's personal. That's considerate of you. He was impressed with her respect for his privacy. If you're worried that I'm going to report everything to Vaughn when this is all over, I can tell you right now I wouldn't do that. I'm sorry the family lost Howlin' at the Moon. It means a lot to them, but it also means a lot to me. I can see that. He was still waiting for the sense of jubilation he'd expected to feel. Maybe, once this business with Cynthia was over, he'd be ready to celebrate. Come on, let's go see what my little sister has done to the family pictures. He gestured toward the hallway that branched off from the living area. First, doorway on your right. He followed her into the gallery, which had been set up by a professional curator. A wooden bench ran down the center of the room, but that was the only furniture. The walls in the windowless room were covered with framed photographs of various sizes, some color and some black and white. Each had a museum-style label underneath giving the date and occasion. He and Cynthia had their own walls, and the other two contained family groupings, pictures of his parents when they were kids and pictures of them as a couple. Track lighting highlighted the photos without producing any reflection on the glass. His father had spent a fortune on this gallery. Luke checked Cynthia's wall and swore softly to himself. He'd never counted how many pictures there'd been of her, but he guessed there had been at least 50 in various sizes. Close to a third of them were now only empty frames. She took all her recital pictures. Giselle walked over to Cynthia's wall. She went through a lot of trouble. Why not take the whole thing, frame and all? Too awkward. Whatever she plans to do with those pictures, she wants to be able to transport them easily. The frames would make that tough. Guess so. Giselle wandered around the room studying the display. Sort of. Ruins the family photo album concept, doesn't it? The albums still exist. They're in a vault. But the minute my dad saw this windowless room, he came up with the idea of turning it into a family gallery. He couldn't imagine how upset Cynthia must be to have done this. In a way, taking pictures from here was better than pulling them out of the somewhat fragile family albums in the vault. He suddenly realized he'd grossly underestimated her passion for dancing. I love this one of you wearing your Mickey Mouse ears. He glanced over to where Giselle stood surveying all the pictures of him. Smile on that lush mouth. No wonder. He looked dorky in those ears. Yeah. Well, that was my Mickey phase. I wore that hat everywhere, including to church. She'd been right about the personal nature of this room. Well, now that I know what she's taken, he said, we can go back out and enjoy the view if you want. I'm enjoying this one. She pointed to a picture of him in a football uniform. What position did you play? Quarterback. Were you any good? He shrugged. I guess. We took state my senior year. Then I'll bet you went to college on a football scholarship. You'd win that bet, but I'd rather not dwell on. Just trying to get a beat on you, Dalton. Bachelor's? Master's? MBA. I see. Football star and graduate student. Did your father dedicate another room for framed diplomas and trophies and such? Luke laughed and shook his head. The lady was certainly persistent. Yes, but we're not going in there. It's plain embarrassing. Let's head back to the living room and wait for dinner to arrive. If you insist. She paused on the way out. Is that your mom when she was still performing? She gestured to a studio shot of his mother dressed in bright red sequins and feathers. Her headdress was nearly as tall as she was. That was a publicity shot she had taken right before she met my dad. She'd considered going to Hollywood and trying her luck out there. But instead she married your father. She did and never regretted it. He was the love of her life. Cynthia looks a lot like her. I know, and people tell her that. I think it's part of the problem. He sighed. Enough family history. He gestured toward the doorway. After you. With one more glance at his mother's picture, Giselle left the gallery and walked out to the living room. Once there, she turned to him. What would you have done if the poker game had gone the other way, and you'd lost this? She spread her arms to encompass the elegant living space with its stunning view. I don't know. He'd played that scenario over in his head many times in the days leading up to the game. I'd like to think I would have recovered and forgiven myself for being so reckless, but I don't know if I would have. I'm grateful that it didn't turn out that way. But you allowed yourself to take that risk, knowing that it could turn into a defeat for you. He nodded. No matter what happened, I wouldn't have to spend my days looking at a Cartwright-owned property and thinking about the feud that probably killed my dad. His doctors told him to stop obsessing over Harrison Cartwright, because it was bad for his heart. But he'd been betrayed by his best friend, and he never got over it. Every time I looked at that bar I was reminded of that. So I set up the poker game. She gazed at the richly patterned carpet at her feet. Finally she looked up. That's all Cynthia wants, Luke. To have that kind of control over her. Destiny. He met her gaze and couldn't help smiling. You're good, Giselle. I didn't even see that one coming. Nice try, but the two situations are completely different. I don't agree. Cynthia's a semester away from graduation. Her brain is fine-tuned right now. In the groove. She'll never be more ready to finish that degree than she is now. If she puts it off for a few years, I'm afraid she'll struggle like crazy to get back up to speed academically. Or she might come back more focused than ever and blow away the younger students. Dancing is like any other sport. It's great when you're young and athletic, but it's not a career for a lifetime. So what? I'm not very familiar with this field, but it seems to me she could teach or choreograph productions or... Okay, sure. He gazed out at the kaleidoscope that was Vegas. But I think she'd be bored to tears living the life my mother had. Giselle stood there without saying anything for several seconds. Finally she spoke. Okay, I get it. He looked at her in surprise. What do you get, exactly? You see your sister trying to follow in your mom's footsteps without realizing she's nothing like your mom, even though she looks like her. You think she's liable to end up being miserable from the lack of mental stimulation. Yes, exactly. So how do I? The doorbell chimed. We can talk about it later. Dinner's here. But elation filled him. Giselle finally understood why he was so determined to get Cynthia back on track. Although he'd met her only a couple hours earlier, he no longer felt alone in his quest. Chapter 6. A portly gentleman with all the bearing of an English butler rolled a double-tiered cart through the living area and over to the linen-covered dining table. By the west window, Giselle breathed in the aroma of grilled steak, roasted veggies, and werewolf? For one electric moment, her gaze met that of the formally dressed man in his 60s. No doubt about it, the butler was a werewolf. She was dying to know the story behind this bizarre situation, but figured she wouldn't be getting it soon. Greetings, Mr. Thatcher. Luke seemed really happy to see him. I'd like you to meet Giselle Landry from San Francisco. Giselle, Mr. Thatcher has been serving our family for, is it almost 20 years now? He glanced at the butler. Almost, sir. He bowed in Giselle's direction. Pleased to meet you, Ms. Landry. Same here, Mr. Thatcher. The butler hadn't reacted to her last name, and yet, if he would know the Landry pack was one of the most powerful in the Bay Area. He'd probably spent 20 years learning to keep his expression neutral and his mouth shut. She wondered how he fit into the Cartwright/Dalton history. Are you originally from London? Hertfordshire, madam. You've brought us some heavenly-smelling food. I dare say you'll enjoy it. He started unloading the contents of the cart onto the table. Our chef is the best in the state. And he's not happy because I order pizza half the time, Luke said. He makes you a very good pizza, sir. Mr. Thatcher finished arranging everything on the table and took a lighter out of his pocket. But he was pleased to get this order tonight. He lit the white taper sitting in heavy silver candlesticks. Luke winked at Giselle. Guess I'll have to make him happy more often. I'd hate to lose the guy because he was sick of making pizza. After this meal, sir, you'll give up on pizza for good. With the kind of flourish that he'd probably perfected after years of service, Mr. Thatcher whisked the silver domes away, revealing two carefully arranged plates each, bearing a fillet, grilled asparagus, and an artfully spoon serving of mashed root vegetables, a basket of bread, 2 pieces of chocolate mousse cake, and 2 glasses of ruby-colored wine completed the meal. Giselle stifled a moan of pleasure. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. Was all she could do not to yank out a chair and sit down so they could get started. Will there be anything else, sir? Mr. Thatcher stood poised beside the cart, prepared to roll it out the door. Luke glanced at her. Giselle? Anything more you need to go with the meal? Not a thing. Except she'd love to know why a were had served it to them, but She couldn't very well ask that. This is a feast. Then I guess we're all set, Mr. Thatcher. Thank you. Have a great evening, sir. Just call when you're finished and want me to. Clear. With another slight bow, he rolled the cart into the foyer and let himself out. He's fabulous, Giselle said after he'd left. So he's been with your family for almost 20 years. Guess so. I've lost track of it, but I'm sure my dad knew. 20 years ago. He was finally doing well enough to start hiring live-in servants. According to my dad, Harrison Cartwright recommended Mr. Thatcher for the job. Now that's fascinating. She had to say something to keep her jaw from dropping in amazement. Had Harrison Cartwright installed a spy in Angus Dalton's household? That made no sense because 20 years ago Harrison and Angus had been the best of friends. Yet she could think of no other explanation. Normally, werewolf live-in servants preferred to work for wers. Working for humans didn't give them enough privacy when they wanted to shift and get some wolf-style exercise. She wondered if Mr. Thatcher had made do with trips to Howlin at the Moon and its underground forest. Now that would be close to him too. Does he have a first name? Luke laughed and moved over to the table. It's Melvin, but I honestly didn't know that until I started signing his paychecks in January. He's always been Mr. Thatcher. Incredibly proper, but incredibly loyal. I was afraid my mother would ask him to go to France with her, but she didn't, thank God. Ready to eat. You know it. Deciding to think about the werewolf/butler/spy thing later, she sat down and sighed in appreciation. This really is terrific, Luke. Hope I won't embarrass myself by attacking this food. Please do. He picked up his wine glass. But first let's toast. What are we toasting? I haven't figured that out. My family is big into toasting though, so it's a habit with me. His blue gaze warmed as he smiled at her. I suppose a toast between the two of us could get complicated. It could. Your toast might be something I can't agree with. Then, here's to success. She chuckled. That's ambiguous enough, I guess. To success. She touched her glass to his and drank. The wine was pleasantly dry, the perfect complement to a steak dinner. Nice. Glad it suits you. I just thought of another toast. Okay. To a cooperative effort as we work through our problems. I'll drink to that. She touched her glass to his again and then took another sip. She met his gaze and felt a tug of sexual awareness. Not good. I keep thinking about that picture of you with the Mickey Mouse ears. She wasn't really, but maybe if she could, it would squash her growing interest in him. He rolled his eyes. Please don't. If you really hate it that much, you could take it down, couldn't you? No. Why not? His expression softened. Because my mom and dad loved that picture. Oh. And every time he looked at it he remembered that. Her heart squeezed. He cleared his throat. Hey, let's not let this get cold. Dig in. You bet. With a quick smile she picked up her fork and steak knife. But he'd touched her with that comment about the picture. She'd have to watch herself. She didn't believe in getting involved with any human male, and certainly not one whose name was anathema to wers. Luke had just made his first cut into his steak when his phone chimed. Giselle kept eating, but she had a bad feeling about that chime in the future of her amazing meal. Laying his knife and fork back on the plate, Luke took his phone out and checked the screen. Text from Cynthia. And looks like another damned riddle. He glanced from his phone to his plate. We can eat quickly while we figure it out. Giselle knew she wouldn't enjoy the meal as thoroughly because now they'd be focused on Cynthia's next step. But she was determined to eat it. She took a bite of steak, chewed quickly, and swallowed. It was incredible, as she'd expected it would be. Lay the riddle on me, Dalton. Let's see what we've got. I'll read it to you in a minute. First let me look at this other text from Owen. I'm going to keep eating, and it's just a suggestion, but I would do the same if I were you. Yeah, you're right. He scooped up a forkful of mashed root vegetables. I'll check his message in a minute. I'm praying he's located her and we can give up this wild goose chase. What's he supposed to do if he finds her? I hope you didn't tell him to hold her prisoner. No, he looked up quickly from his plate. Despite what you think, I realize this should be handled diplomatically. Owen's not supposed to let her know he's around. If he sees her, he reports that to me. Good. And then what? I have to hope she'll stay in one place long enough for me to get there and talk with her. She chewed and swallowed. Do you know what you're going to say to her? I'm working on it. Do you know what you plan to say to Bryce? Luke tackled. More of his food. Pretty much. First I'm going to find out if he truly doesn't want to take over from our dad. If he doesn't, then I have to hope he'll come back anyway. We miss him. That'll be my main message, that we all love him and miss him. She hoped Luke would start with telling Cynthia he loved her, but she wouldn't offer that advice unless he asked. After swallowing another bite, Luke read Owen's text and groaned. He's lost their trail. He's beginning to think they might have disguised themselves. I wonder if that has anything to do with the fact Bryce knows I'm with you. How would that change things? I'm not sure. He hasn't texted me back yet, so I don't know how he's reacting. She took a quick gulp of her wine and went back to cutting into her steak. At first I was afraid he wouldn't like that I flew down here without telling him. That would be my guess. But my brother is complicated. If he's tired of his rebellion routine, he might be grateful that I've come for him. That way he can say he came back. Because I was so pitiful. She popped a piece of steak into her mouth. Luke smiled at that. I'd love a demonstration of you looking pitiful. As hard to imagine. The steak was so tender that she could chew and swallow it in no time. Watch this. She gave him her best sad soulful look, the one where she looked like the big-eyed characters in a Japanese anime cartoon. Hey, that's pretty good. You should definitely use that on him. In fact, you should probably teach me. It might work on Cynthia. His grin had a boyish quality to it. She was charmed by that grin. Too bad she couldn't let herself be charmed. I doubt it. She's not going to believe you're pitiful at this stage in the game. Probably not. But maybe if you talk your brother into going back to San Francisco, I'll have a better chance of convincing Cynthia to finish her degree. Maybe. She thought it would depend entirely on how much empathy he showed for his sister's dreams. Giselle also realized the more empathy he showed, the more appealing he would become to her. She vowed to be on guard for that. Of course, Bryce might not be getting tired of his Las Vegas adventure. He might be furious that I showed up and even more determined to help Cynthia run us ragged. That's the other possibility. Well, unless Owen figures out their disguise, I guess we keep solving the riddles and see where it takes us. Maybe if we solve all their riddles, they'll agree to a meeting. She saw the frustration in his eyes. I can tell you don't like this. No, but I'm willing to go along with the game. It seems as if she really needs me to do that. I think she does. Giselle hoped that Cynthia's campaign worked to change his mind. Maybe becoming a showgirl wasn't the best choice for his sister, or maybe it was the perfect choice. All she knew for sure was that Cynthia should be the one to decide. Giselle also thought that bringing about a truce between Cynthia and Luke might open the door to a conversation with Bryce. A part of her wanted to twist his ears off for being so contrary, but after seeing the way Cynthia was struggling with Luke's expectations, she had a lot more sympathy for Bryce's position. Maybe he didn't want to be an alpha, so he shouldn't be forced into the role. She didn't want it either, but maybe there was a decent alternative, although she couldn't think of one right off the bat. None of her cousins were alpha material. She'd been so engrossed in her thoughts that she hadn't noticed that she'd finished her meal. She glanced over at Luke's plate, and his was nearly empty, too. He glanced up. What do you think about the riddle? You haven't given it to me yet. I haven't? Oh, sorry. He put down his fork and picked up his phone. I may even know what this one refers to, but let's see what you say. Water has rhythm, and so do I. Watch it dance and watch it fly. Love is reaching for the sky. His voice roughened on the last sentence. He cleared his throat. Giselle's chest tightened. This young woman positively ached with her desire to dance. And Luke knew it too. Otherwise he wouldn't have choked up on that last sentence. She gazed at him and wondered if he'd relent, right there at the dinner table. If he was considering that, he didn't let on. It's the Bellagio, right? The fountains out front. I think so. He pushed his plate aside. We might as well get going then. There are other fountains in Vegas. Could she mean somewhere else? I doubt it. She picked up her wineglass and then put it back down. Guess I'd better not have any more wine if I'm driving. We could walk. It's not that far. Then let's walk. The exercise might do us good. It would do her good at least. When he'd become emotional while reading the riddle, she'd wanted to put her arms around him, although that would have been dangerous and she wouldn't have risked it. But now she wanted to shake him until his teeth rattled, and that wouldn't solve anything either. They put on jackets and headed out. Luke wore leather instead of the blue denim, which he'd hung up because it was still damp. They took the private elevator down, but this time they walked out through the lobby. Coming in, they'd gone straight from the parking garage to the elevator, so Giselle had missed seeing how the hotel had changed since her first visit. Apparently she was getting tired because she spoke when she should have kept her mouth shut. It's changed. He glanced at her. You were here? Oh wait, of course you were. Family. Friends of the Cartwrights would get rooms when no one else could. Yes. And the less she said about her previous visit, the better. My dad thought it was way too blah. All that soft lighting and greenery wasn't for him. Or maybe he just didn't like it because Harrison did. Giselle had loved the way it used to look and feel. The lobby had been an oasis of tropical plants and waterfalls, thick carpets and soothing birdsong. She remembered walking in from the hubbub outside and sighing in relief. Now the place was filled with glittering surfaces, marble floors and crystal chandeliers with lights so bright they hurt her eyes. The sound of flowing water had been replaced with rock music that bounced off the mirrored walls and made her want to cover her ears. Conversation and laughter seemed twice as loud because nothing absorbed the noise. You don't like it? She opened her mouth to say something diplomatic. He put a hand on her arm and shook his head. Don't bother. I didn't expect you to like it. You were the one who nearly fainted in a crowded elevator. What I think of the lobby shouldn't matter anyway. That's true, but you got that look on your face as if you wanted to spare my feelings. You don't have to worry about that. I was younger when my dad remodeled the lobby and I thought it was awesome. But lately it's been getting on my nerves. Too noisy and glaring. She laughed. Luke Dalton, you're turning into an old fogey. Could be, and that's not a good thing. The marketing people have conducted exit surveys and most guests love the lobby. One woman said she felt as if she'd stepped inside a giant tiara. Perfect description. I've never wanted one, giant or otherwise. No? I thought most women loved tiaras. Not me. And she wasn't a woman either, but that was beside the point. She knew female werewolves who liked those things, but she'd never yearned for one, not even when she was a little kid. He studied her. I guess that makes sense. You aren't wearing any jewelry either. I hadn't noticed that before. Are you allergic? No. I'm just not attracted to the idea of wearing it. One more thing to worry about. That must be frustrating for any guy who wants to buy you a gift. She smiled at him. Not if he has some imagination. Interesting challenge. He gestured toward the revolving door that led to the sidewalk. Shall we? He followed her out. As they started north toward the Bellagio, she was jostled by the crowd. Not much, but enough that she temporarily lost track of Luke. She figured he'd have no trouble finding her, considering her height and red hair, so she kept walking. Besides, she didn't want to waste time looking for him when she'd caught the unmistakable scent of a were nearby. With so many competing smells, she couldn't identify Bryce for certain, and he wouldn't be the only werewolf walking along the strip. Yet the breeze carried the scent back toward her, and she noticed a tall, broad-shouldered male ahead of her. His hair was black, not red, but if Owen was right and they disguised themselves, then it could be Bryce up there. She hurried, trying to catch up with him. A strong hand closed around her upper arm. I almost lost you, Luke said. Maybe we'd better. Just a sec. She kept her attention on the tall figure walking about 20 feet ahead of them. Definitely a werewolf. Besides the faint scent, she could tell by the way he moved. With the breeze blowing in her direction, he wouldn't be able to scent her, which gave her the element of surprise. She slipped out of Luke's grip and grabbed his hand. Come with me. I think I see Bryce. Chapter 7. Which one are we following? Luke scanned the crowd and tried to ignore the warmth created by their interlaced fingers. Holding hands was a good idea in this mob, especially if they had to try to catch up with her brother. There shouldn't be anything personal about it, but holding hands with Giselle as they hurried down the sidewalk felt extremely personal. He liked holding hands with her way too much. It's that tall one up there with the longish black hair. See him? Yeah, but what makes you think that's Bryce? He's the same height and Bryce has shoulders like that. If he's disguised, like Owen thinks, then the black hair could be a wig. Doesn't that look like a wig? I don't know. Maybe. I'm no expert. Is there a woman with him? I can't tell. Somebody's walking on his left, but from my vantage point I can't see whether it's a woman or not. You're taller. What do you think? Hard to say. I think it's a woman, but she has on a bulky coat. I don't recognize it, by the way, so if that's Cynthia, she's wearing someone else's clothes. Or she bought some new things for her disguise. I guess that's possible too. He wanted to believe that was her because he would love to end this ridiculous charade she had going. He gave Giselle's hand a squeeze. Let's catch up with them. Stay behind me. I'll run. Interference. Go. Years of playing high school and college football came in handy sometimes. He kept a tight grip on Giselle's hand, and she tucked in behind him as if she'd played the sport herself. When they reached the corner, he was close enough to tap the shoulder of the person walking on the tall guy's left. Cynthia? Is that you? The person turned. He wasn't Cynthia, and he obviously wasn't happy to be mistaken for a woman either. He stopped and scowled at Luke. You looking for a problem, buddy? Sorry. Mistaken identity. The guy puffed out his chest. I'm thinking you need your eyes checked. Mister. Forget it, Stanley. The tall guy, who didn't look anything like Bryce Landry, jerked his head toward the MGM Grand. We're gonna miss the poker tournament if we don't get a move on. Yeah, okay. Glaring once more at Luke, the shorter man turned and followed his friend across the intersection. Giselle sighed heavily. I'm so sorry. I thought there was a good chance it was them. Hey, it was fun. He grinned at her. It was. Absolutely. Tugging on her hand, he started across the street. Might as well go before they lost the walk signal. I got a little adrenaline rush thinking we might actually catch them. Didn't you? Maybe. He glanced over at her. Just maybe. Her apologetic expression changed and she smiled. Actually, yes. I was trying to decide what I was going to say to Bryce as we shoved our way through the crowd, and my heart was going a mile a minute. And what were you going to say to him? Something simple, probably. Like, let's talk. Whoops. That was the phone. Just now. Might have been mine. Then let's stop a minute and get over to the side so you can check. Pulling her phone from her coat pocket, she clicked on her message. It's a text from Bryce. And, gotcha, sis. She looked at Luke. He was watching all that. I wasn't wrong. That he was nearby. I just picked the wrong candidate out of the crowd. Luke turned and scanned the area. Okay, if they're following us around, I need to get Owen involved. What good would that do if they're in disguise? He blew out a breath. I don't know. I just... Hey, you said you were having fun a minute ago. That was when I thought we were following them. It's not quite as much fun imagining them following us. Because you like to be in control of the situation? Yes. He continued to search the people going by. Cynthia might be in disguise, but she was his sister. He'd know her if he saw her face, even if she was wearing a wig, different clothes, and wild makeup. But the sidewalk was crowded. They could be anywhere. Well, we're not in control, Giselle said. But we can choose our next move. I suggest we continue on to the Bellagio, watch the fountain show, and see what happens. Might as well. He took her hand as they made their way to the front of the Bellagio and found a spot by the railing. At that point he couldn't come up with a good excuse for holding on to her, so he let go. He missed that connection instantly. Perfect spot. She smiled at him. He was beginning to look for ways to make her smile because he enjoyed seeing her do it. That probably wasn't a good sign that he was ignoring his attraction to her. At least I don't have to worry about getting wet this time, he said. I doubt Cynthia could jimmy the fountain so it sprays on me. I doubt Cynthia would want to face vandalism charges for jimmying the fountain at the Bellagio. I wish I knew how long they intend to keep this up. Then something occurred to him. As long as they chased around after Cynthia, he had an excuse to be with Giselle. Once this exercise was over, Giselle would leave. He realized he wasn't looking forward to that. I suspect she's hoping to wear you down. She abandoned whatever she'd been about to say as the music swelled. Oh look, it's starting. He'd seen the current show dozens of times, both from this vantage point, where he could hear the music, and from the windows of the penthouse where he could only watch the plumes of water arching into the air. From 40 floors up, the effect wasn't as spectacular as it was standing here surrounded by music from top-grade speakers. Luke always enjoyed the experience, but never more than now when he was able to watch Giselle's reaction to it. She held on to the railing as if needing to anchor herself to reality. Her expression was rapt, almost childlike, as she watched the dancing water. The music vibrated around and through them, arousing Luke in a way it hadn't before. The bass seemed to resonate with greater force, and the violins sang along his nerve endings, teasing him with desires he had no business having. In his imagination, he and Giselle were the only two people here. Inappropriate though it might be, he pictured them making love in time to the music and the cascading water. Eventually the crotch of his jeans pinched, reminding him that they were not alone, and he'd better imagine something else. He'd be wise to imagine Giselle getting on a plane in a few days, because she would definitely be doing that. She was the CFO of Landry Enterprises and her life was in San Francisco. Then another thought hit him. The bad news was that Giselle would be going back to San Francisco. But maybe the good news was that Giselle would be going back to San Francisco. What happened in Vegas stayed in Vegas. No, he was thinking crazy. Sure, he'd caught her looking at him during dinner, in a way that might mean she was interested in him, but for all he knew she had a steady guy back home. If she was in a similar situation to his, and she was attracted to him at all. But he didn't know the answer to those things. Still, the idea had taken up residence in his brain and he doubted it would go away anytime soon. He glanced over at her and let the idea simmer a bit. She had a hotel room at Illusions, but while they were dealing with her brother and his sister, they really ought to stick together, close together. Then he could find out the answer to some of his burning questions about her. The more he thought about inviting her to spend the rest of her stay at the penthouse, the more he saw it as the perfect solution. They needed a command central, and the penthouse made the most sense. Having him at one end of the strip and her at the other would be impractical. The music swelled to a crescendo and the water shot into the sky with breathtaking force. The drama of the final moment was reflected in Giselle's expression of awe. She'd been swept away. Luke longed to see that same dazzled look in her eyes in a far more intimate setting. As if she felt his gaze on her, she looked at him. If he was any good at reading the message in a woman's eyes, and he was, then her thoughts might not be so different from his. But he would make no assumptions about that. He'd keep watching her and try to pick up on her cues. He gestured toward the fountain. Great show, huh? Wonderful. Her breathing was quick and shallow, which meant that she'd been excited by the show or excited by other thoughts that ran along the same lines as his. Maybe both. I think it was especially good tonight. Now that was a boneheaded comment. The show was computerized, and unless the program didn't work right, it would be the same exact presentation every time. He glanced up at the sky. Perfect night for it. I agree. She had that cute little smile going on again, the one that told him she thought he was goofy, but she didn't seem to mind goofy. But then she looked away and the smile disappeared. So maybe she did have someone else and had just reminded herself of that. He took a deep breath. Well, nothing's happened in connection with Cynthia, so maybe we should think about. Excuse me. A heavily tattooed woman with multiple earrings and a nose ring approached him. Are you Luke Dalton? He wasn't sure whether to admit it or not. The woman seemed a little scary. And she wasn't Cynthia. His sister might be in disguise, but she'd never be able to make herself look like this without spending hours in the hands of a Hollywood makeup team. Cynthia hadn't had hours to devote to such a project. It's nothing bad, the woman said. I'm not going to serve you with a subpoena or anything, but you fit the description I was given, and I was told you'd be here with a redhead, watching the Bellagio fountain do its thing. She pulled a manila envelope out of her large tote. Luke recognized his sister's handwriting on the outside of the envelope. When did you get that? I'm not supposed to say. I'm just supposed to give it to you and leave. She smiled. I wouldn't refuse a tip though. Luke dug out his wallet and located a $100 bill tucked behind the 20s. If you'll tell me when and how you got the envelope and what the woman was wearing at the time, you can have this. Her eyes widened. No. As much as I could use that, I promised her I wouldn't tell you. You should let her dance, though. It's not like she's going to strip. I can see why you'd object to that, but what she wants to dance with the moonbeams, that's classy. Luke was very aware of Giselle standing next to him, listening to every word. She told you about that? He asked. Sure. We shared a moment. My family didn't want me to get the tattoos and the piercings, but it's my life, you know. She glanced at Giselle. You get what I'm saying, right? Once you're an adult, you get to decide. I agree, Giselle said. I thought you would. The woman moved a little closer to Giselle. You look like a take charge kind of lady. We can't let other people push us around. Like present company, for example. Luke sighed. I completely agree, Giselle said, suppressing her smile. She could see Luke was suffering through this conversation. Here. Luke shoved the $100 bill at the woman. Take it with my blessings. Now give me the envelope. You bet. She handed it over. Thank you. Wait. I have something else for you. She reached into her tote, pulled out a pink squirt gun and shot him in the face. Bye now. She hurried away. As water ran down Luke's face and into the open neck of his shirt, he didn't look at Giselle. Don't you dare laugh. I won't. But her voice quavered as though she wanted to. I have a tissue in my pocket if that would help. Thanks. I'd appreciate it. The white tissue fluttered in front of him like a flag of truce. Can I hold the envelope for you? Sure. He handed it over and accepted her tissue so he could mop his face. I don't know where Cynthia found that squirt gun, but it packs a punch. Luke, I have a confession. Oh. Balling the tissue in his fist, he glanced around for a trash can. One happened to be nearby, so he lobbed the wet tissue into it. 2 points. About what? My brother. As a kid, he was fascinated with practical jokes. The bucket of water trick is something he spent hours getting right. And he knows his squirt guns too. He considers the super pumper ones too obvious. So he'll take a normal-sized one and fool with it until it delivers a blast of water that'll drown you on the first shot. Luke stared at her in disbelief. And your brother is how old? 30. And you know what? I never connected that significant birthday with him shucking his responsibilities and coming to Vegas. But that might be part of it. Maybe this is a last fling before he has to settle down. Bully for him. Luke was in no mood to hear about some guy's birthday angst. When he'd turned 30, he'd been watching his dad's health deteriorate. He'd prayed that the hard-working man he idolized would live to enjoy a ripe old age. His prayers had gone unanswered. I honestly thought he'd outgrown the practical joke stage, and for the most part one think he has. But he seems to have appointed himself Cynthia's champion, so he's come out of retirement to help her harass you. Does he have any more tricks like this up his sleeve? Probably. I'll have to think back to those days and make a list. Some things he did were never blamed on him. Others he couldn't resist taking the credit. For Anne was willing to accept being grounded in exchange for the glory of a prank well and truly executed. He was at his peak around 12 and I was only 10 and easily impressed. I'm 30 going on 200, and I'm not impressed at all. He heard the martyred tone of his voice and winced. He'd inherited a fortune and he'd acquired the education to manage it. He was grateful for what he had. But maybe he was wound a little too tight. He had a pretty good idea of how to unwind, but he also had a strong suspicion Giselle had a sweetheart back in Frisco. Even if she didn't, she couldn't think kindly of a man who'd made cutting remarks about her brother. He took a deep breath and a mental step back. Look, I apologize for that. Crack. I don't know Bryce at all, and it's possible I've made some unfair assumptions about him. Her eyebrows lifted. I'm glad to hear you say that, Luke. From his viewpoint, he might think he's helping solve the problem. I believe he does. I'll bet they've bonded over the fact their relatives are leaning on them in ways they don't like. I don't want them to bond permanently. Luke realized that didn't sound very complimentary either. Nothing against your brother, but I know. Believe me, I'm hoping they're just good friends. She glanced over at him. Are you going to look at what's in the envelope? I can guarantee it's another of her recital pictures. Maybe I should leave it in there for now where it's protected. This rate, I don't know where another blast of water might come from. Listen, would you be willing to head back to the penthouse so we could have a strategy session without me being in danger of water sabotage. She hesitated. I'll walk back with you, but I was thinking I should fetch the Harley and go back to my hotel room. It's been a long day. That clinched it for him. She wasn't interested in spending any more time with him than necessary. Okay, I'm sure you're tired. How would you like to handle any more communication from them, assuming they stick together? We can forward texts to each other. I'm willing to meet you if it looks as if we need to do that, but we probably should both get some sleep and continue this tomorrow. Fair enough. I'll walk you back to the Silver Crescent parking lot. This time he didn't reach for her hand. She was making it pretty obvious that wouldn't be a welcome gesture from him. The depth of his disappointment took him by surprise. In a very short time, Giselle Landry had gotten under his skin. Chapter 8. During the water show at the Bellagio, Giselle had found herself thinking about something. She was strongly opposed to having sex with a human, and not just any human either. She needed to put some distance between herself and Luke ASAP. They walked in silence back to the Silver Crescent. The music from the water show thrummed in her veins and pictures of Luke flashed through her mind. She'd been aware of him watching her during the show, and his presence there had been exciting, way too exciting. His comments afterward had tickled her, because they told her he'd been thinking similar thoughts, but he'd wanted to appear cool and composed. But when she'd looked into his eyes and felt that click of recognition, that moment when she could all too easily allow herself to get carried away, she'd pulled back. Seeing the sadness in his expression hadn't made her feel very good, but she was doing the right thing for both of them. Giving in to the pull of their mutual attraction wouldn't be doing either of them any favors. He stayed with her until she'd retrieved the Harley and was ready to leave. He scrubbed his fingers through his hair, which reminded her of the moment in the hotel room when he'd done the same thing. His gestures, his smiles, his laughter were becoming important to her. That had to stop. So if anything happens, he said, I'll text you and vice versa. That works. He smiled. We didn't eat the cake, but I'm sure they have great desserts at Illusions too. I'm sure they do. She started the engine. We'll keep in touch. Right. She started down the street and fought the odd sensation that she was leaving someone important behind. No, she was leaving temptation behind. Maybe Luke. Dalton was a test of her resolve not to get sexually involved with a human male. If so, it had turned out to be tougher than she'd ever imagined it would be. Traffic was heavy, and she was held up by a red light. Her cell phone chimed, but the light changed and she had to concentrate on her driving. 2 lights later, she finally glanced at the message. Another riddle. Want me to take this one? Damn. Her heart started pounding as if she were 17 and had been asked to a dance. That was bad. Pulling into the circular drive at Illusions, she balanced on her bike and looked at the riddle. Romance in the air, voices raised in song, artistry and movement as they glide along. Had to be the gondola rides at the Venetian. She sat there telling herself to let it go. But doggone it, she wanted to know what Bryce and Cynthia had cooked up for the gondola ride at the Venetian. She could meet Luke there, satisfy her curiosity and come straight back here. But not on the Harley. It had been a long day, and an emotional one. Her reflexes might not be as quick as she needed them to be in Vegas traffic. She'd cab it this time. After quickly texting Luke that she'd meet him at the Venetian in about 20 minutes, she turned the Harley over to valet parking and hopped in one of the cabs parked at the curb. Luke must have been watching for her because when she got out of the cab in front of the Venetian, he was right there. Thanks for coming. No, Harley. I was ready to let someone else drive. Sympathy flashed in his eyes. You really are pooped, aren't you? I am, but my curiosity got the better of me. You understand it's a water ride, right? Yep. And you're willing to risk it, knowing that Bryce has cooked up something special. She decided to be as honest as possible. I tried to talk myself out of meeting you here, but I couldn't stand the idea of not knowing firsthand what they've come up with now. His boyish grin flashed. Let's go check out the gondola rides. And he took her hand. She could have pulled away, but the simple fact was she didn't want to. Holding his hand earlier tonight had been a pleasure. She would go back to Illusions after this, so she told herself she could allow herself to hold his hand now. As they started into the building, a young guy who looked to be around 20 stepped forward. "Are you Luke Dalton and Giselle Landry?" Luke glanced at Giselle and she gave him a thumbs up. They were here now, so they might as well see what happened next. "Yes, we are," Luke said. "Then come with me. Someone has paid an obscene amount of money for you to have a custom gondola ride." "Wait a minute." Luke caught his arm. "How custom? Are we going to get wet?" "How would you get wet?" "Oh, I don't know," Luke said. "The boat capsizes or sinks, something like that." The guy shook his head and smiled. "Not gonna happen. I think the custom part is that you go to the head of the line, and the gondolier has agreed to sing something special for you." He looked at them with a twinkle in his eyes. "Special night for you too, maybe?" "Yes," Giselle said. "Very special." She enjoyed the shock in Luke's expression. He just popped the question. "Excellent." The kid beamed at them. "Congratulations. We love romance at the Venetian. Right this way. I'll take you to your gondola." "What question?" Luke asked as they followed the guy at a brisk pace. "I didn't pop any question." She lowered her voice. "Yes, you did. You asked if I was ready to risk a water ride with you." "Yeah, but that was a question, not the question. You nearly gave me heart attack." "Relax. I have no interest in a trip down the aisle." But that kid was expecting something, so I played along, pretending to be his engaged girlfriend. Might not be the wisest thing she'd ever done, but again it seemed like a harmless bit of silliness, and it made the gondola folks happy. A little voice in the back of her mind taunted her with the possibility that she was acting out a fantasy of her own by masquerading as Luke's one and only. So what if she was? It was just a water ride, over in a few minutes. Didn't matter. Much as Luke chafed under the constraints of this game Cynthia was playing, it had its rewards. The lure of a riddle had brought Giselle to the Venetian, and, even though she was play-acting this gondola scene, he intended to enjoy himself, at least until he became drenched. He knew it would happen. He just didn't know when. "This lucky couple is celebrating a very special night," said the guy who'd brought them to the gondola landing. "I know you'll take good care of them. Luigi." "Luigi?" Luke looked at the gondolier. "Really? While I'm giving gondola rides?" The dark-haired, olive-skinned man in a shirt with vertical stripes flashed his white teeth. "Are we ready?" "Absolutely." Giselle looked at Luke and lowered her voice. "You should put your arm around me." Oh, this experience continued to improve. He discovered that Giselle made a very good snuggling partner. She understood exactly how to nestle her curves against his angles so they fit like a couple of puzzle pieces. "Perfect," Luigi said. "Don't forget the tradition." Luke glanced at the gondolier. "What tradition?" "Couples in love usually kiss going under the bridges." "Oh." Luke felt Giselle stiffen. "And we're off," Luigi said. Luke put his mouth next to Giselle's ear. Breathing in her scent jacked up his pulse, but he made himself say what he figured she wanted to hear. "Don't worry. I won't honor that tradition." "Okay." She relaxed against him in obvious relief. So he wouldn't kiss her, but that didn't mean he couldn't enjoy the cuddling. He had an armful of very beautiful woman, and she felt warm and exceedingly willing. That wasn't real, of course, but he could dream. The boat did, indeed, glide along, and he could understand why couples found this to be a stimulating experience. The phallic shape of the boat and the liquid canal. Well, it was obvious, right? The gondola ride drew spectators, a cheerful lot who waved at the passing boats. Luke kept a sharp eye out for Cynthia and Bryce, but even if they were in the crowd, they wouldn't be close enough to aim a squirt gun accurately. All was well in his world until the gondolier began to sing. It wasn't his voice, which turned out to be a deep baritone and was probably one of the reasons he'd been hired. It was his choice of songs, or rather Cynthia's choice of songs. The song was "I Hope You Dance." She was determined to break him. The lyrics of the song fit her campaign, but the song cut deeper than that. Every time he heard it, he was transported back to a dark auditorium where he and his folks had watched his little sister perform her first solo, a ballet to this very number. She'd been 14, which was young to be dancing a solo number, but she'd begged her teacher for the chance and had knocked one out of the park. He swore softly under his breath, which helped to block the relentless parade of sentimental images. Giselle obviously heard his muted but colorful language because she began to shake with silent laughter. Cynthia was playing dirty, but she was sure focused. That had been Giselle's evaluation, and boy had she nailed it. Cynthia had decided that she wanted something, and she was by damn going to get it, no matter how long she had to torture him. He wondered if she'd find a way to work water into this gig after all, but the Venetian couldn't risk having guests end up in the canal, either accidentally or on purpose. No matter how much money Cynthia had thrown at them, they weren't going to dump his ass overboard. Besides, that lacked finesse. He was in a boat, and shoving him into the water would be crude and obvious, in addition to lawsuit-worthy. Even though Giselle hadn't listed her brother's various pranks yet, Luke had already figured out that Landry went for the unexpected and the relatively harmless. Bryce was, Luke grudgingly acknowledged, a good match for Cynthia. She had always been so pressured to use her intelligence to excel, and she probably admired Bryce for using his for smart aleck tricks. Luke only hoped she wouldn't admire anything else about him. Being in league together against the uncooperative big brother was one thing. Being in love with each other was more serious. The song continued endlessly as the gondolier gave it all he had. He'd probably been told this was their song. Ironically, it would become their song tonight. Now every time he heard it, he'd think of Cynthia's dance recital, but he'd also remember this gondola ride. He had a feeling memories of Giselle would haunt him long after she'd left town. For the time being, though, she was very much here. As she sat next to him, she was quickly losing it. Her shaking had become more pronounced, and little snorts of laughter were escaping around the hand she'd clamped over her mouth. The gondolier was really getting into it, and the crowd lining the canal loved the performance. They clapped and whistled their approval, which only encouraged Luigi to ham it up some more. As he flung his arm into the air and projected the single-word dance, someone lobbed a baseball-sized object toward the boat. Luke barely had time to shield Giselle before it landed on his head and broke. A water balloon. He should have guessed. Security! Luigi bellowed as he abandoned his song. Someone's throwing water balloons. Security. No big deal, Luke said. He'd rather not have Cynthia and Landry arrested, although they were probably long gone by now anyway. Luigi turned and crouched next to Luke. Sir, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? The Venetian will make this right. I've never had someone throw a water balloon at my boat before. I'm really sorry. And on your special night, too. Luke ran a hand over his dripping face. I'm fine, really. It's only water. Takes me back to my high school days. Luigi still seemed concerned. I wish I could promise that we'll find whoever threw that balloon, but with crowds like this, it's nearly impossible. I doubt you will find him, Giselle said. I'm pretty sure it was my brother. Oh. Luigi looked surprised, and then he grinned. A little welcome to family prank on this guy, huh? He glanced at Luke. I suggest you keep your honeymoon plans to yourself, my friend. Luigi, those plans are so top secret, even I don't know what they are. Ah. Luigi's smile widened. So you're letting your future bride handle the details. Smart man. The happier she is, the happier you'll be. Luke met Giselle's gaze. My thoughts exactly. Her emerald eyes were filled with laughter, and he sure did enjoy when that happened. Maybe it was worth getting a little wet. Representatives from the casino met them at the dock. One of them recognized Luke and insisted on giving them gambling tokens, coupons for free drinks, and a complimentary dinner for two. Luke could tell they all were relieved as hell that he wasn't going to make a problem for them over a water balloon. Eventually they left, and he turned to Giselle. Want to drink and gamble? She smiled at him. Not particularly. You handled that well, though. Apparently I'm getting used to dripping. You have to admit that song was hysterical. He gazed at her sparkling eyes and flushed cheeks. Damn, but she was a pretty woman. Good company, too. I could tell you thought so. I'm surprised the boat didn't start rocking, the way you were trying to keep from cracking up. He was so sincere that I didn't want him to know I was laughing. So tell me, does your brother repeat his tricks, or does he tend to move on to new ones each time? I'd be surprised if he repeated anything with you. He considers himself something of an artist in this regard. He's got a hell of a throwing arm. Accurate, too. She nodded. All-star pitcher for the high school baseball team. Huh. He had to admit the baseball information made a difference in how he perceived Bryce Landry. An all-star deserved some respect for all the work involved in getting to that level. A total screw-up couldn't accomplish it. He should know. Under different circumstances, you two might have become friends. Tell you what, if he'll give up this campaign and convince Cynthia to go back to school, I'll be his friend for life. I'll name my first kid after him. I'll put him in my will. So are you saying that after all this you're still dead set against her plan to be a showgirl? He looked into her eyes. Sadly, the laughter wasn't there anymore. That's what I'm saying. Somebody has to keep her from making bad choices. I'm the only one available to do that. Chapter 9. Giselle was ready to whack Luke upside his incredibly thick skull. The odds against keeping a 22-year-old from making bad choices were far worse than the odds against hitting $1 million jackpot on a one-armed bandit. But Luke, who was at least as focused as his sister, had decided that Cynthia had to finish her last semester and get that sheepskin, and apparently that was that as far as he was concerned. There was a thin line, Giselle realized, between being focused and having tunnel vision. She suspected that Angus Dalton had been a very focused individual as well, and he'd passed on that characteristic to both of his children. Now they were butting heads, each of them determined to outlast the other. At least there's no envelope this time, Luke said. Maybe she gave up on that. I hope so, because I think we have duplicates of everything in the vault, but I've never made an inventory to be sure. Trusting any pictures to strangers is risky. Maybe she's willing to take chances if it can get her what she wants. Giselle wished that he'd see how devoted Cynthia was to her art. If he allowed himself to see that, he might soften his position. The pictures aren't going to change my mind, so she might as well quit finding clever ways to give them to me. It's a waste of. He stopped talking as a little blonde girl about 5 years old walked toward them. She wore a black leotard, white leggings, and pink sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into a bun, and a small tiara rested on her golden head. She was clutching a manila envelope. Giselle scanned the crowd and saw a woman watching the proceedings very carefully. The woman held a black canvas tote with "Pam Are You Dance Studio" lettered on it in neon pink. Everything about her alert stance signaled that she was this little tot's mother, and that she wasn't about to let anything happen to her kid. Once Giselle satisfied herself that the little girl was well chaperoned, she turned her attention to the drama unfolding in front of her. Luke had hunkered down so that he was on the same level as the child. The tenderness in his expression caught Giselle by surprise. She hadn't seen this side of Luke Dalton. He might talk tough and act macho, but apparently he could also be a total pushover. This cherub had him completely in her power. She held the envelope in 2 hands as if carrying a tray. "Are you Mr. Dalton?" "I am." He spoke with such gentleness that without her were hearing, Giselle wouldn't have caught what he'd said. "And who might you be?" "I'm Ella. My mommy's over there." She turned to point, let go of one side of the envelope and had to make a quick grab for it. Whoops. Almost dropped it. The lady said to be very careful. Her solemn blue gaze returned to Luke. "It's a picture. She showed us it." "Tell me, Ella, is that lady still here?" Ella shook her head, which made her tiara jiggle. She let go of the other side of the envelope to grab for it and would have dropped it entirely if Luke hadn't slid his hand underneath. "Thank you for holding it for me." After adjusting her tiara with one hand, Ella clutched the side of the envelope again. "You can let go now." "Are you supposed to give it to me?" "Yes." "Are you ready to do that?" "No." "Why not?" "First I'm supposed to tell you something." She took a deep breath and blew it out again. Then she looked up and began to recite. "Dancing is good for people. People." Her smooth little forehead wrinkled. "People are very happy when they dance. There. That's it. You can have the envelope now." She shoved it toward him. "Thank you, Ella." Luke took it as if accepting a Nobel Prize. "And thank you for delivering the message." He stood. "It's true." Released from her responsibilities, Ella grew more animated. "Dancing is great." She began hopping from one foot to the other. "My dance teacher, Miss Pam, she entered us in this dance contest and we're all here in Las Vegas, and this is what I wore, except I had to take off my ballet shoes so they wouldn't get all dirty, and we're having so much fun." She jumped up and down and would have lost her tiara if she hadn't clapped her hand to her head at the last minute. "Time to go, Ella." Her mother came over. You delivered your message, so let's leave this man and his friend in peace. Okay. Ella glanced up at Giselle as if noticing her for the first time. Are you a dancer too? No, I'm afraid not. That's too bad. If you were a dancer, you could be in this contest. There's a whole bunch of us. Even mommies are in this contest. She swung her arms wide. Wanna see me do something? She placed one sneakered foot against her calf, balanced on her other foot, and put her hands together over her head. She wobbled only a little bit. Giselle clapped enthusiastically. Bravo! That's lovely, Ella, her mother said. Now we need to go. Everyone's ready to leave. She smiled at Luke and Giselle. The woman who gave us the envelope showed us the picture. She said it was important that you get it back and that you'd understand what it was all about. I do, Luke said. Your daughter is something else. The woman laughed. Oh yes, she is definitely a dancer. I swear she was dancing before she was born. I could feel her twirling around in there. Well, have a nice night. Holding Ella's hand, she walked away. Luke stared after them. My mother used to say that about Cynthia, that she could feel her dancing before she was born. Giselle chose to keep quiet. If that adorable little girl hadn't turned the tables for Cynthia, nothing would. Anything Giselle said now might dilute the Ella effect. After watching mother and daughter join a group of other parents herding a large group of girls in black leotards, Luke turned to Giselle. His expression was unreadable. That must have been the grand finale of that stunt. Guess so. Listen, I should find a cab and get back to Illusions. My driver's on his way. Let me drop you there. Refusing seemed unnecessarily abrupt. All right. He hesitated. If this is out of line, just say so, but when we're together I feel like we're a team. When you head off to your hotel, it's as if the team's broken up. But Illusions is where I'm staying. I understand that, but... He glanced away in frustration, but when he looked into her eyes again, his gaze was completely open. I'm going to level with you. I've had completely inappropriate thoughts about us, but that's over. I'm glad. And she wasn't she? If her heart started racing because he'd admitted he wanted her, she'd get over that inconvenient reaction. This isn't the time or place. I realize that, so you have nothing to worry about from me. But the thing is, I'm more confident that Cynthia's deal will come to a reasonable conclusion. I don't know what you mean by a reasonable conclusion. Hell, neither do I. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Talking it out with you face to face helps me sort out my thoughts. I didn't realize how much I depended on your insights until you went back to Illusions. Like I said, it was as if the team had broken up. She took a calming breath. What are you suggesting? Check out of Illusions and stay in the penthouse. No, her senses went on red alert. That's not a good idea. The place is huge, even bigger than it looks. You'll have your own room. But the main thing is, when there's a new development, you'll be right there. We can discuss it together. His phone pinged and he glanced at it. That's Jim. With the car. He's pulling up now. But Giselle was no longer paying attention. She'd caught the unmistakable scent of her brother, and he was close, very close. Luke, wait here. Instinct kept her from mentioning that she thought her brother was mere feet away. She wouldn't be able to explain how she knew, and maybe Bryce only wanted to connect with her, not Luke. I'll be right back. His blue gaze sharpened. What is it? A feeling. Stay here, okay. But, please. All right. His jaw flexed. I'll text Jim and have him wait at the curb. He won't be able to stay there long. I won't be long. Turning, she searched the crowd going in and out of the Venetian. Then, following her nose, she headed toward a tall blonde guy. Except, he wasn't a guy. He was Bryce. He walked away and she followed. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed that Luke was nowhere in sight. She'd asked for his cooperation and he'd given. She appreciated the effort that must have taken for a guy who liked to be in charge. Bryce drew her deeper into the crowd, but at last he turned around and stopped. The blonde wig was a good one. He looked sort of like Brad Pitt when the actor was younger. Although he seemed to be alone, Giselle glanced around, hoping to catch a glimpse of Cynthia. She's not here. She looked into her brother's eyes. They're green, a shade lighter than hers. Where is she? Somewhere else. Listen, I don't know how long before Dalton comes looking for you, so I'll make this quick. He's right. You're a good influence on him. Cynthia loves the guy and wants him to be on board with her choices. The more time you spend with him, the better. You don't know what you're asking. He's interested in me. Bryce laughed. Of course he is. You're a knockout. But he's barking up the wrong tree, poor guy. I'm not worried about you. You can handle him. Cynthia reminds me of you, which is why I want to help her. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I'd better go. He turned. Wait. She caught his arm. Are you involved with her? He shook his head. I wish I felt that way about her because she's cool, but I don't. We've talked about it. No chemistry for either of us. He shot her a quick grin. Feel better? Yes. Infinitely. Then I'm off. Don't follow me. He slipped into the crowd. His scent lingered for a few seconds and then was swept away as several women wearing strong perfume walked past. As Giselle made her way back to Luke, her thoughts were jumbled. She'd been face to face with her brother and had been so distracted by the issues with Luke and Cynthia that she hadn't asked him the question that had brought her here. She still didn't know if he wanted to be the Landry Pack alpha or not. But she was reassured that he hadn't fallen in love with Cynthia. That was something to hold on to. Now she had to decide what to do about Luke. Luke paced while he waited, although pacing wasn't easy in an area of high pedestrian traffic. He felt certain she'd caught a glimpse of her brother and thought she had a better chance of talking to him if she went after him alone. She could be right, but he wished she'd trusted him enough to say that. Yeah, that was what bothered him more than her taking off without him. He might think they operated as a team when they were together, but it looked as if she didn't feel the same way. It struck him that his life had been spread out in front of her, literally in the case of the photo gallery, but he knew very little about hers. Maybe she didn't trust him enough to tell him that either, and that bothered him. Before he had time to examine why that was, she appeared, walking toward him with that graceful stride he admired. Yeah, he still wanted her. He couldn't turn off his natural reaction, although he wished he could. She held his gaze as she approached. Thanks for waiting. You saw your brother, didn't you? I talked to him, but what about Cynthia? Did you? She wasn't there. What did he say? She hesitated, as if deciding what to tell him. I asked if they were involved and he said no. There's no chemistry. Luke's tension eased a fraction. That's good, but did you ask him if we could sit down and discuss this? No. He didn't want to stay long. They must not feel the timing is right. Yet it seems he deliberately created an opportunity to talk with you. Why? He thinks I'm a good influence on you. Which he obviously thinks I need. At first he was indignant, but that began to fade as he recalled that he'd basically told Giselle the same thing. He just didn't like Landry saying it. He sighed. Well, he's right. I've decided to accept your invitation to stay in the penthouse in one of your guest rooms. You have. Relief flooded through him. Until he'd resolved this issue with Cynthia, he needed Giselle nearby. I'll need my things. He forced himself not to appear overly eager. No problem. Jim will drive us down there so you can pick up your suitcase and check out. He wondered what Von Cartwright would think of Giselle leaving his hotel. She spoke as if reading his mind. Von will hear about it. Because I'm a family friend, his staff will report that I've checked out. Do you care? Only to the extent that I don't want to be rude. He's been nice to me. So send him a text and explain that we're on the trail of your brother and my sister, and we need to be together for efficiency's sake. Giselle pulled out her phone. Would you repeat that? I like the wording. Luke went through the logical explanation again. And thank him for his hospitality. Right. Her thumbs moved rhythmically as she completed the text. Done. The town car is right over here. He gestured toward it. When Jim saw them coming, he got out and opened the back passenger door. Jim, this is Giselle Landry, a guest from San Francisco. Giselle, this is Jim Hicks. He drove my dad for about 15 years, right, Jim? About that. The burly chauffeur smiled at Giselle. Nice to meet you, Ms. Landry. Luke knew Jim had to be curious. Giselle was the first woman Luke had been seen with other than his sister since his dad died. But Jim was a professional and would never let his curiosity show. We need to go to Illusions, Luke said, to pick up Giselle's suitcase. Very good. Jim's gaze didn't flicker. He waited until they were both seated. in the back seat, and then he closed the door. Luke settled back against the leather seat. How did you know Bryce was close by anyway? Just a hunch. He glanced over at her. Pretty good hunch. Do you two have a mental telepathy hookup? Sometimes. When Cynthia and I were younger, I used to think we had one. When she was 2, she managed to sneak out to the pool and fell in when nobody was around to see her. But I got this panicky feeling and raced out there. She was already at the bottom. Giselle's eyes widened in horror. How awful. It was awful. Luke would never forget that moment. I don't remember screaming for help or diving in, but I must have, because I do remember working on her once I got her out. I was only 10, but thank God we'd studied CPR in school. And help came, so I must have screamed pretty loud. Wow. Scary. It was. I watched her like a hawk for the rest of that summer, and the next summer she learned to swim, so I relaxed a little. And here he was once again revealing details of his life when he knew so little of hers. Sorry. Ancient history. Vivid history, though, I'll bet. Were there other times you sensed she was in trouble? A few. Actually, more than a few, but he wanted an exchange of information. This time. How about you? Did you and Bryce come to each other's rescue? All the time when we were little. But as we got older, not so much. He didn't know if she would have expanded on that or not, because just then they arrived at Illusions. Jim parked under the portico. Leaning forward, Luke spoke to Jim. No need to get out, Jim. Giselle has to check out, but we shouldn't be long. He'd never walked into Illusions, and he was damned curious. Luke. Giselle laid a hand on his arm. You can't come in with me. Why not? Can't a guest bring someone in? No. Only registered guests are allowed through the front door. You're not registered. Not even into the lobby? I've never heard of something so ridiculous. Who stays here? The president of Iran. No. I don't get it. We've hosted Tom Hanks and Lady Gaga, and neither of them required that level of security. It's the way the Cartwrights want it, I guess. But come up to the door with me and we'll see if you can step inside for a few minutes and then come right back out. Luke thought about not going because he was ticked off, but in the end, curiosity won out. Okay. He helped her out of the car and walked beside her to the double doors of the lobby. Impressively muscled doormen in gray uniforms stood on either side of the entrance. They both smiled at Giselle. Good evening, madam. Good evening. I was wondering if your companion is not staying at the hotel, correct? The doorman on the right eyed Luke with suspicion. Luke wondered how in the hell the guy knew that. Was it written on his forehead? No, he's not, Giselle said. But he's with me. I was wondering if he could step inside for a minute. I wanted him to see the lobby decor. I'm afraid not, madam. The doorman gazed at her stoically. You know the rules. I know, but I thought a few minutes wouldn't be a problem. Sorry. That was enough for Luke. He didn't go where he wasn't wanted. That's okay. Giselle. I'll wait in the car. She looked embarrassed. But seriously, it doesn't matter. Okay. I'll be very fast. I didn't bother to unpack, so I'll be out in no time. I'll be waiting. He walked back to the car and climbed in. Wouldn't let you go in, would they? Jim said. Nope. I didn't think they would. I've seen plenty of folks get turned away from that door. Must be some really famous people staying there. I can't imagine who. Really famous people stay in hotels all along the strip. And they don't keep you from walking into their lobbies. Luke was just as glad to get Giselle out of there. The Cartwrights were paranoid about security, and paranoia was never a good thing to be around. She'd be better off at his place. Then again, the restriction could be a marketing tool. Only those who paid the high price of a room were allowed to walk through the front door. Judging from the way Harrison Cartwright had decorated the silver Crescent, this lobby would be similar in tone. Waterfalls and green plants, no doubt. The kind of atmosphere that Giselle preferred. He thought about the penthouse, which had fresh flowers in vases, but not too many potted plants. None, actually. Now he wished that he had some, and maybe a water feature. But at least he didn't have to worry about whether his bedroom was too white. She'd never set foot in it.